All right, everyone, welcome in to episode 17 of Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports. I'm Mickelson, as always, live from Chattanooga, Tennessee, the United States. And joining me is my dear friend from Americana, Sao Paulo, Brazil, is Gustavo Tomazeli. Gus, how are you doing here on this? Uh, here in Chattanooga, it's a very warm evening. It's actually in the upper 60s today here in late winter. Ice storm not too far away from us, though. So it's another chaotic weather day in the South.
Yeah, here in Americana was a very rainy afternoon. Around 6 p.m. Brazil time was a very heavy rain, but overall very hot. Another hot day in the mid 70s. Tomorrow going to be high of 90, so it's going to be a hot weekend. I'm good. Just came from broadcasting on the Vida Nova FM radio 0-0 from state Paulistão second division game between Portuguesa and Kings of Piracicaba. It was a good game overall. Three big opportunities that Portuguesa missed it on the post, but overall good game. I mean, I love covering the. I wish I could show to Americans how great is the state of São Paulo second division. It's one of the hardest tournaments because there's a lot of teams that are really good, and players in Brazil prefer to play the state of São Paulo second division than to play for Brazilian first division teams that are playing other state championships. Just how competitive second division of the state of São Paulo tournament is. So it was a really good game, scoreless, but it was a good broadcast. But I'm good. I'm doing good. So let's get going on this late Wednesday night.
Absolutely. So the open topic we're going to do today is how hard is it to move on from veteran key players, and obviously recent departures like Tom Brady, for example. I guess I precipitated this topic, but when you lose a big player, it can take years for your team to recover. I think of a team like the Denver Broncos. This comes to mind because one of my coworkers had a job as a big Broncos fan, and I was just thinking about how ever since Peyton Manning left, the Broncos have not made the playoffs. They haven't had any consistent quarterback play. And I'm wondering if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be doomed to the same outcome without Tom Brady. Because if you think about it, before Tom Brady showed up, they hadn't even been to the playoffs in a decade. And then, they had two amazing years of Tom Brady. But now, what's next? I mean, Bruce Arians is talking about, Bruce or Blaine Gabbert being the future for Tampa Bay. And sometimes when you lose a player of that caliber, it's just impossible. Like, think about the Chicago Bulls. They have 6 rings ever, but all those were with Michael Jordan. They haven't even been back to the NBA Finals since Michael Jordan left them. And I only believe they've been back to the Eastern Conference Finals once with Derrick Rose when he was still healthy in his prime. So it's really, some players are the team. And I'm just kind of curious what examples you have in Brazilian sports of this being the case.
I have two situations on that. I'll call this in Brazil. There's a lot of the Eli Manning effect, which is when a veteran key player gets a really steady decline, but you don't know how to move off him because you have the memories and all the significance of that player. A lot of teams in Brazil is dealing with the situation. My team, Corinthians, I feel like is dealing that with the goalkeeper Cássio. Cássio has been the starting goalkeeper for Corinthians for a decade. But he's a veteran player. I mean, uh, he's 34 years old for a soccer player that can be starting declining. He still is a starter, but Corinthians is already thinking about moving off him. They just got a younger, promising goalkeeper from Ponte Preta named Ivan, and there was Walter before, but Cássio is still the goalkeeper. But you know, but Palmeiras and São Paulo dealt with that situation not too long ago. Palmeiras Marcos was Palmeiras goalkeeper starter for like I think was like 15 years. I think was like 1998 until 2012, he was the starter. For 14 years, he was, of course, not all the games, but he was pretty much the constant starter. And he was hard to move off him because at the end he was not playing well, but the fans didn't want to boot him because he was the significance of all the feelings of the fans who was represented by him. The same thing happened with Sao Paulo and Rogério Ceni. Rogério Ceni was the starter from practically 1997 until 2014, and he was still playing very well by the end. I remember a game back in 2013, like 2 years before he retired, that he was one of the best goalkeeper performances I have ever seen on a road game versus, I think it was Universidad de Chile, in a playoff game for like a South American Championship. But it's so hard to move off those veteran key players because it's like you don't want to let it go the good moments, especially like Eli Manning or Rogério Ceni, a player that was the face of success. So you don't know how to finish the era.
Yeah, that story really reminds me a ton of Pecorine, with the former goaltender for the National Predators, who was their longtime goaltender for over a decade. But it was kind of a messy transition from him to Yusei Saros, who is now the starting goaltender for the Predators, because Rene had been so good for so long and helped lead the team to the only Stanley Cup Finals appearance ever in franchise history. So, you don't want to give up a player like that. And, I'm thinking of a guy like Derrick Henry in the future, where I don't think we're there yet, but like in a few years, it's inevitable, especially with a running back, there's going to be a decline at some point. And especially for someone who has been as popular and as dominant, you don't want to give a player like that up because the fans are going to demand that you stay there. Right now in the Atlanta Braves fan base, there's a big debate on whether or not the Braves should re-sign Freddie Freeman. And Freddie Freeman's still playing at a top level. So, like, he definitely is going to command a big dollar wherever he goes, and deservedly so. But you have to ask, how much more of his prime does he have left? And that combined with the popularity puts the Atlanta Braves, frankly, in an impossible decision. Do you give him all the money in the world? You're shortcutting the rest of your roster to an extent, as we know he's going to decline eventually. Or do you let him walk to build other parts of your roster, but also anger in the fan base and perhaps the rest of the clubhouse, but not re-signing your star who just helped lead you to a World Series championship? And that's just an impossible decision because some teams are gonna make the forward head decision. Cut the you know make the tough decision now, get the consequences over with now, and move on, or suffer in the future. So this is where GMs make their bucks. Yeah. How you handle this situation.
No, yeah, and especially I feel like when you have a GM or even a president, it's a tough decision. Like for example, here in Brazil, Cruzeiro, who is in a massive financial hole, and it was just purchased by a conglomerate led by former Cruzeiro, former Real Madrid, and former Brazil national team striker Ronaldo. They just purchased in December, but they had to make tough decisions like let it go the goalkeeper Fabio, who was the starter keeper for I believe more than 15 years, but he was had to let it go because of the debt the club had with the player, and then the new ownership group didn't want to, you know, had more debt on top of the debt that already between the club and the player. But the fans were insanely mad. In a matter of 2 weeks, they were like really happy with the ownership group, with really mad and protesting just because a veteran key player was let it go. So that showed the significance of one player who was the face of success, but he had to let it go because of that situation.
Yeah, I feel like there's no way to ever really avoid that. I mean, even when that player retires, the next year is still going to be like, okay, it's just not the same because they're not there. Peyton Manning's not there. Next year, when Blaine Gabbert's walking out on the field for the Buccaneers, that's not Tom Brady. Um, and there's really no way to avoid that. So I think you always have to make the best decision for the team. I'm not saying that's always getting rid of the player. Like, I think in the case of Freddie Freeman, I still think he has a couple of good years left. I would totally find to have that guy in my roster still. He's proven that he can still play at a high level. But, every case is different. Every player is different. And, it's just one of the... Go ahead.
And it was funny. I don't think that ever happened in American sports. But like I give the example of Rogério Ceni, one of the legendary keepers of Sao Paulo, that he played forever there, played more than 1,000 games. But then a year later that he retired, he was chose to be Sao Paulo's manager. So he was back in Sao Paulo, but off the field. But it was only brought it up because Sao Paulo was having an identity crisis and the fans were not happy with the performance on the field. So what the front office did, they got their idol on the field to be their manager. It didn't work out. 6 months later, he was fired, but he was still as a rookie as a coach. I mean, he was an experienced goalkeeper, but as a coach, he was a rookie. So, you know, it's so funny. You use a veteran key player that retired also as a shield when he chose sometimes as a manager.
It reminds me of the people who, whenever
Uh,
Tennessee has a coaching opening, that wants Peyton Manning as OC or head coach. There's
or
no
Jason
telling if, yeah, Jason Witten, or Al Wilson for defensive coordinator. I mean, just because they were good players doesn't mean they're going to be good coaches. It's so it's a, you know, it's a difficult situation, right? And like Philip Fulmer, for example, he's probably tarnished his legacy just a little bit being AD and having that in the way it did with Jeremy Pruitt and that whole mess. Even though he won a national championship as a head coach, because a lot of people think that his lack of performance in the recruiting trail down the stretch of his career put Tennessee in the position that led it to its 10 to 15-year decline that we've seen. So it's and even then, we're talking about veteran players. This is also applied to veteran coaches because, and Philip Fulmer, I think it did. You could tell his performance relative to other coaches was declining. Like he couldn't keep up with Urban Meyer. Couldn't keep up with Nick Saban, and it put Tennessee behind the eight ball. And 2-3 bad coaching hires later, Tennessee is in the hole where it is now that Josh Heupel is trying to dig the balls out of. Trying to think what else. What are there like good examples here? Like Coach K, to an extent.
No, but it's funny. Like also veteran coaches. I think in Brazil there was not a situation like that because as I discussed before, Brazilian head coaches if they stay 2 years in one team is a miracle. 3 years, oh my God, it's the biggest miracle ever. I mean, look at Abel Ferreira. He won 2 South American championships. He won 1 Brazilian Cup. He should be staying forever of all the accomplishments, but he was being pressured because he lost the FIFA Club World Cup last year. The fans were chanting bad things about him, so even he is not sure can stay forever. But I mean, one soccer example I'll say is Sir Alex Ferguson, who stayed in Manchester United from the late 80s until 2013. But after he left, Manchester United was never the same. They still haven't won Premier League, only won like a FA Cup and a Europe League, which is second tier tournaments for a club of the the size and the financial and how rich Manchester United is, but they still couldn't process. I think this coaching change, not having Alex Ferguson anymore.
Right. Another coach I just thought of, Jim Boeheim, basketball head coach of Syracuse. I mean, this dude was supposed to retire like 3 or 4 different times. He's still coaching. Syracuse this year is 15-12. They haven't been to the Final Four since 2016. They made the Sweet 16 last year, but if it wasn't for a couple of good runs in the tournament, Syracuse would have probably moved on by now. They probably should have, because Jim Boeheim, to me, runs an outdated system that clearly isn't getting it done at the top level that Syracuse should be able to perform with. And I understand they don't have Carmelo Anthony, which I know that's who he won his national title with. But, Syracuse, when I was a kid, they were always a top 5, top 10 team. And that program has clearly declined under Jim Boeheim, who he can't get the most out of that program anymore. And whenever he leaves, a lot of great coaches are going to want that job, and they're going to be able to turn Syracuse right around. Like I think of Steve Forbes with Wake Forest. I know I'm bringing up college basketball a lot but I think that's the sport where the coach has the most impact out of any sport. Because the thing about Rick Barnes at Tennessee, look at how he's transferring the program from when he found it to where it is now. So when I think of coaches, I think of college basketball, and Jay Boeheim's an example of a guy who, this topic applies to, because I think Syracuse has let him coach for too long, but he's so legendary there that you're not going to be able to force him to go. You can't fire him. The Syracuse fan base is going to riot if you do that. So you got to let him retire when he wants to.
And even when veteran head coaches have off the field scandals, how can you move off them? Bob.
I talk about Bobby Petrino. Jim Paterno.
Jim Paterno. Look how Penn State, dealt with that mess.
Yeah, I mean, that was a mess. I mean, there's a ton. Well, not a ton, but there you will still run into certain Penn State fans who think Joe Paterno did nothing wrong. That they were like, oh, he did everything legally. He mentioned it to his higher ups, yada yada yada. Well, unfortunately, to any Joe Paterno truthers, he covered up for his buddy defensive coordinator who was a pedophile. So he deserved to get fired, and I hate that it tarnished an entire insane, amazing career, but you can't do stuff like that and expect to keep a clean image. And sometimes it takes something that crazy to knock out a guy like that, to knock out a Bob Knight or a Bobby Petrino. Do you think Arkansas really wanted to fire Bobby Petrino when he was caught having an affair with an assistant? No, but they had to, because the situation gave him no other choice. And we almost saw the situation unfold again recently with the Auburn coach in Brian Harsin. At least if all the rumors are online, but apparently the school never found anything, so they weren't able to fire him. And honestly, the rumors may have not been true at all, and it might have been just a hit job from boosters, which just shows the turmoil down in that program. But it just shows you how much politics ends up playing a part of it. And but even beyond the politics, facts sometimes are so bad to where you have to get rid of the guy.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, in Brazil, I would say, Palmeiras and Atlético Paranaense play in the South America Recup. It's like a Super Cup, and it looks like it's going to be a last-minute penalty, but I'll keep you guys updated. Shout out to our friends at WTK, Rock Solid Sports, watching our show in Knoxville, Tennessee. Also, people at the Vida Nova FM radio, Gabriel Bacarin in Americana. Thanks for checking out with us. But, it's so, because, I mean, of course, there are situations when you are able to do that transition, to make that, I think Michael Jordan's situation was, I guess for the player and the fans were good. Of course, the Bulls were a mess after that, but you don't want to ruin the legacy. I feel like retire on top. That's the goal of everybody. Like Peyton Manning, of all players, like retiring with a title. That's the goal.
Oh, absolutely. And Michael Jordan got to retire a champion, at least until he went to the Washington Wizards, but no one really cares about that part of his career. And but so the moment he left, I mean, that was it for the Chicago Bulls as a relevant franchise because they really haven't done much of anything since. I know their team is good this year, but you just kind of just to begin to wrap this topic up, it's impossible to replace certain players, and it's just nothing's ever going to change about that. So you just always have to appreciate the players like that when you have them. Like if I give a Chiefs fan, enjoy Patrick Mahomes for the next decade. If you're, Cincinnati Bengals, enjoy Joe Burrow for the next 10, 15 years. The Milwaukee Bucks, enjoy having Giannis. You got to enjoy towns like that because they only come a handful of times in a lifetime. And there's some teams who may never have a player like that. Just go ask like the Sacramento Kings.
And Palmeiras scores with Rafael Veiga at the last play of the game in the South America Super Cup. I think was penalty. I'll talk more about this game later in Brazilian topics, but literally the penalty just happened. 2-2. Palmeiras was lucky and they just tied the game. But just to wrap up my part, I think in Brazil, unfortunately, we're going to see less and less veteran players, retiring in their original squad or staying forever. I mean, but I think there's teams that still rely on them. Like Fluminense right now, people joke they're like a home, like a retirement club because there's a lot of old players like Fred, like Felipe Melo, Fabio, uh, Nene, even Ganso, that is not technically old, but he's already in decline. But they're doing good. They just won in the in the Libertadores like qualifying game. So it just showed that veteran players can still be reliable and they can still be produced. But moving off them, it's very hard and know how to transition so you don't ended up in a fall in a pit hole when a key player leaves, especially like sports like basketball or football.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But let's talk some American topics. And speaking of baseball, so it looks like the MO Major League Baseball, what's going to happen? Because I mean, I think as of today, there was supposed to be spring training games, but there's no action happening because there's still no progress in the negotiations, right, between the Major League Baseball and the Major League Baseball Players Association.
Yeah, so basically, it came down earlier this evening, that if no deal is met in the next 5 days before before Monday, that all games up through the opener will be canceled. So no spring training, all of that, and at the very minimum, we would have a shortened season. And that could cause some serious problems because players want to play 162 no matter what. The MLB is saying the only way you're playing 162 is if you agree to our terms by Monday. And that's going to be a problem because players get paid per game and they wouldn't be able to recoup because they get paid, in 162 installments essentially per game. Like Max Scherzer, for example, gets paid $230,000 per game. A minimum, because the league minimum is $640,000, gets paid about $3,500 per game. And for each game you don't play, you lose that money. So, like, if there's 5 games missed, Scherzer loses $1 million. And if you miss like half the season, that becomes really big, really quickly. So that's like $300,000 at least for every player, and for some players, that's millions of dollars. And there's a chance, I think, if this doesn't get solved, that we don't see any baseball, at least in the major leagues, because players, they're not going to go out there and play for a protracted salary. I feel like it's a difficult situation, And I don't know if either side's going to budge because I just think the MLB and the MLBPA have drifted so far apart at this point. And I think this was really exaggerated by COVID. I think this is where really it started over that whole 60 game season. And really, whatever problems started because of that never got solved. And now we found ourselves in a situation where we're going to face probably the worst lockout since the 1994 season. And if you think about it, that lockout was the turning point for MLB from being the American pastime to just, a second father to the NFL. And this could further drive it down to irrelevance.
Yeah, and I remember when we were at WHK discussing during when we were back on air on Rocksall Sports that even if they find a solution for the resume the season after the first COVID hit, there was still gonna be some aftermath issues with that. I feel like COVID hit Major League Baseball in the worst time possible. If you know, if that situation happened a year, 1 year after the collective bargaining agreement was reached, it would have been one effect. But
Mhm.
when you have to deal with the COVID situation with all the financial implications, couple of months, maybe a year before the end of the CBA, then tensions were rising. That's why I was not surprised that it's taking so long because I remember all the conversations that we had during that period, during that time that was uncertainty, and we're like, they found a solution, but they found a solution for that year, but they just push more problems down the carpet, and now the carpet was, let's say, turned around or cleaned. A lot of the issues just rose.
Right. And yeah, well, it'll be interesting. Is a lot of those conversations where what happens to the minor league teams, what happens to the Tennessee Smokies, what happens to the Chattanooga Lookouts, teams like that. Uh, and it seems like from past lockouts that those leagues would still continue, but a lot of the discussions have been, what benefit should minor leaguers get? Because right now minor leaguers, they don't make like $30,000 a year, and with inflation and housing shortages and all the economic issues that have been caused in large part by the pandemic. I mean, not all of it. A lot of it is other economic forces, both man-made and just naturally occurring, that's making it impossible really for these dudes to really have a consistent living. So they're talking about giving these guys housing and everything else, uh, which will cost every single organization a pretty penny. It's a it's something they definitely need to take care of, but I don't know. I'm not optimistic. I really feel like the MLB is in a horrible spot. I think Rob Manfred, as we've talked about multiple times, is a horrible commissioner. He's probably the worst sports commissioner, maybe of all time. It just seems like every move the MLB makes is the wrong one.
It was so funny how comparing Rob Manfred to Roger Goodell, it seems like miles apart. Like, Roger Goodell is going to get another contract extension because he was able to turn NFL to the power league that is it today. I feel like the NFL just keep growing and growing. And then when it seems there was hitting issues like, let's say, the kneeling or the concussions and anything, NFL just found ways to overcome that and keep growing and growing. And the NFL Super Bowl game, their final game, was two teams that were unappealing, like the Rams that don't have even a bigger fan base in their own city versus the Bengals on a small market team. And the Super Bowl had a big ratings because the league is strong. And the Major League Baseball, I'm sorry, it's only for the markets that are in and the romantic sports fans. I say old romantic sports fans that romanticize the past, and but I mean the average sports fan that don't live in cities of Major League Baseball teams, they're going to be driven further and further apart because of this, ineptitude of find a ways to solve problems and keep the league interesting.
Yeah, and just the innovation. Like, for example, this week it came out the NFL and XFL are going to have a partnership, and the NFL is going to use the XFL as what they basically say a petri dish. Basically, they're going to test out new rules there. They're going to, develop players there. They're not afraid of trying new things. I mean, the MLB, on the other hand, they're trying to slash minor league teams as an effort to save money at places where they could be trying out new rules themselves. What is the number one complaint we hear about baseball? It's too slow. The games are too long. Well, why not find ways to make the game faster? Why not find ways to make the game more appealing for a younger audience? It's just mind-boggling that the MLB is so against change. And I think part of it too is just the culture. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago with Barry Bonds. Baseball writers, I feel like, enable this because they have this romanticized view. It's like, oh, this is the beautiful game. There's no crying during baseball. We are, this is it's like the James Earl Jones speech from Field of Dreams. Baseball just continues to go through the loins of American history, or however he phased it. But it's 2022, and nothing is meant to last forever and meant to be sacred. And baseball is not one of those things that's meant to last forever if it doesn't evolve with the times.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's what I mentioned before. Like baseball is still paralyzed by those, writers and people and fans that are so stuck in the past and stuck in the view of baseball as the national pastime as not like an entertainment league. The NFL and the NBA, they're moving towards entertainment. Baseball is still stuck as like this glorification of or romanticizing the game. Oh my God, we can't change that because of they would. Oh my God, but I can't change the rule because of it would change the game, and we have to keep sacred. Like, but that would drift further and further away because
Right.
at the end, a sport league is an entertainment product.
Right.
And
Like NASCAR, for example, like with their new cars and some of the new format changes like that's meant for entertainment, meant for closer, more exciting racing because they know that the modern audience doesn't have the attention span to sit through a 500-mile race in one sitting. Like that's why they have stage racing. That's why they break it up into a couple of parts. That's why now everyone has a set car that they get instead of everyone building their own cars because they know that teams aren't going to have as big of an advantage over one another like they did. So that will hopefully cause more parity. And I think we saw that on Sunday in the Daytona 500, which we'll be talking about here in a little bit. But going back to the MLB, kind of wrap up that topic, they need to figure something out. I think the owners need to cave in just a little bit because I think they need to sit down and realize, okay, this is what we want, right? We want expanded playoffs. We want this and that. But what is the long-term cost if the players don't go along with us? And I really think they're playing with fire here. And because here's the deal. The American public has been through a ton in the last 2 years with a pandemic, a really exhausting election, mass riots in the streets, now dealing with a potential war in Europe. People want something stress-free to come home to at the end of the day with everything else that's going on. And the MLB of all this drama is not going to be one of those things, especially when you have all the other streaming services option. They can go home and watch Netflix. They can go home and watch Disney Plus. They don't have to watch MLB. If the MLB is going to create more drama because there's so much drama in the world already. Now, they got to figure out a way to get their stuff together and present something that's actually fun because people want fun. They don't want this highly just toxic situation that's developed. So it's disappointing to see because I mean I've just seen this in other avenues of entertainment too, where like you make something that's really fun, or it looks fun, but then it's really negative and it's really toxic, and it ruins the whole thing. And as a consumer, I don't want to watch that because there's already so much negativity in the world. Like, don't add this. Like, you don't. If there's negativity in my sports, they're not going to watch. It's like the Olympics. That's why I didn't watch the Olympics, because I don't want to be constantly reminded of China's human rights abusers. I don't want to watch an alpine skiing competition with a nuclear power plant in the background. So yeah.
But as of today, there's going to be baseball played in April because according to minor league baseball website, April 5th will be the opening day for the AAA as Iowa Cubs and the Buffalo play in the former home of Toronto Blue Jays at Salem Field at their opening game, and the AA is going to start in April 8th with the Tennessee Smokies playing the Chattanooga Lookouts at 7 p.m. at Smoky Stadium. I'll be curious to watch the game. I miss so much going to Smoky Stadium. I remember we did one of our last shows there. That was historical when we did our Smoky Stadium Rock Salt Sports show.
Because it was like a second to last show that we did in person. Together was
Yeah.
out there at the Smoky Stadium. But yeah. So anyway, so the next one I want to go to is this interesting story about Phil Milkeson. And some of these other golfers, although it seems like most of the other golfers have backed out at this point. What's going on here is Phil Mickelson apparently is unhappy with the current structure of the Pro Golf Association, which of course is the organization that runs golf. And I don't know why I said that, but anyway, so apparently Phil Mickelson came out and said that, okay, so basically so he had a book, right? And he said this is Phil Mickelson's comments. That this is talking about the Saudi Arabian government. They're scary MFers to get involved with. They killed Washington Post reporter Jamal Khashoggi and have a horrible record of human rights. They execute people over there for being gay. Knowing all this, why would I even consider it? Because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape how the PGA Tour operates. And essentially, he's saying that he was willing to go play in Saudi Arabia for more money and ignore all of their human rights abuses. And in the last few weeks, I feel like there's been a lot of conversation about China's human rights abuses. Saudi Arabia is just as bad, probably worse. I mean, you basically can't be a gay person or a woman over there and have any rights whatsoever. It's Saudi Arabia is they're horrible. Their royal government is horrible about human rights, and it's just really disconcerting to see, American golfers ignore all of that for, money. And I understand that's the dollar is the ultimate truth. It reveals people's true intentions, and certainly that was disappointing to see. Although Milkeson did come out later and said that that he isn't going to take it, and that he apologized for saying that basically he's going to ignore all of that to take the money. But still, the fact that, it's not the first time it's really happened, right? Like, we saw how the NBA reacted when Daryl Morey criticized the Hong Kong protests, and we essentially, had guys like LeBron James come out and say, that I shouldn't talk about Hong Kong because it would affect my brand. It's just disappointing because I feel like with the position that these athletes are in, there's certain arenas where they feel like they're empowered to talk about, when it comes to like police brutality, right? And Black Lives Matter, which they should talk about those things. And I hate when you got people like Laura Ingraham who says, that LeBron James should shut up and dribble. I don't think he should. But at the same time, I want to see these people also hold like authoritarian governments like China and Saudi Arabia and Russia to the fire, who are not providing their citizens with, basic human rights, who are mysteriously disappearing political opponents and just being horrible. So it was a pretty insane story to see occur.
I mean, one thing I'm glad about Brazilian sports is that politics are still not as much as involved. I feel like the closest I feel like it comes is when the president, now Bolsonaro, goes to handle the trophy to a team or something, or but Brazilians are still not in that territory. Of course, Americans have to deal with that more because they want to globalize their sport, like NBA wanted to Asian markets, golf wants to go to the Middle East market, but of course, when you go through those spectrums of globalizing your sport, of course going to have to deal with the some black backlash of the places that you choose to go.
Oh, absolutely. And you have to know like what you're getting into. Like if you're going to go to Saudi Arabia, okay, you know that you're gonna have to accept certain things if you're willing to make money in that market. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like the only reason why America hasn't gone to war with them is because they own so much oil, right? Like that's the reason why they weren't attacked after the 9/11 attacks, versus some of these other countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, even though Saudi Arabia technically had way more involvement to begin with that whole situation. So it's a yeah, I was just really disconcerted to see, and especially considering that he acknowledged everything was wrong. Obviously the Kasagi attack was very well publicized, but like all the other misgivings of that government, it was just like, well, I don't care about that. I just want the money. It was a mask off moment, and I feel like uh, more people should have seen that than did because it's very concerning to see that. And I feel like it's not just sports; it's all American businesses. I feel like, especially all these corporations who go into these markets and don't care what's going on with the local population. It's like we are just here to make money, and the human cost be damned.
Again, just make me thankful for the Brazilian sports structure stalker still, because Brazil in the world spectrum is more like an export of players than the
Right.
export of the sport. Like we just were European teams and now even American teams come to Brazil to get our young players. So Brazil export the players, not the sport itself. So it just makes me thankful because of course in Brazil right now the politics not as much involved in the sport. But it's so funny
Yeah.
that now in Brazil we're discussing even more about like now now I think it's going to become because as Brazil opens their sports teams to become basically corporations, and you can have an owner or ownership group. For example, the owner of Crystal Palace, John Textor, now bought a Botafogo. So
Hmm.
now let's see what he is going to be involved in if he has some shady deals in England, if that is going to affect the Botafogo view of his ownership group. I
So
think
I've got a question about that. So, um, if he wanted to transfer a player between clubs that he owned, could he do that?
I would believe so. That's a great question. That's a great question. That's actually a great question that nobody thought about in the Brazilian media. That I think I'm going to discuss in my Sunday show. When you have an ownership group of one team and you have another team interested in a player, the conflict of interest in that because it was so funny.
Right.
Like in the last Crystal Palace games, in the billboards around the stadium, there was Botafogo kind of sponsorship, and it was fun at all. But that's fun. That's interesting when a Botafogo promising young player gets attention. Does Crystal Palace have a preference?
Right,
That's a
because I'm
great
thinking like,
question.
for example, like if Endrick, for example, ended up Botafogo and was just became a stud and was going to be the next Neymar, and like Crystal Palace are like, oh, I could sell Endrick to myself and bring him to England.
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. I, to be honest, I haven't thought about that. I think Brazilians haven't thought about that yet because it's so fresh, this situation. And even Cruzeiro, the ownership group that Ronaldo has, also owns Valladolid from Spain.
Hmm.
So if Cruzeiro has a promising young player, does Valladolid have the preference of buying the player.
Right. Because I mean Europe still is the top dog when it comes to international soccer. Even though Brazil is trying to get on that level, um, if you have more European ownership, I feel like they're going to try to maintain that hierarchy. So any great players that come out of Brazil, they're going to want to transfer them to Europe immediately.
Yeah, like, and I probably that's why there was an American ownership group that just bought 70% of Vasco, the group called 777 Partners from Florida, and they purchased for 700 million reais, and they're gonna also, with including purchasing debt and stuff, was 1.7 billion reais,
Hmm.
and they're gonna have a due diligence confirmation with their investment group. But I think it makes sense. I think it even makes sense getting that question from the American side, because a lot of MLS teams are getting rewards from getting young Brazilian players. Look at New York City FC; they just won the MLS Cup, and Thales Magno was one of their best players, and he was a promising young player that didn't attract Europe that much, but he was good enough to be a star in New York. And Brenner in Cincinnati, and I think Arthur in Columbus also make a difference. So I think uh, that can be an interesting opportunity for an American group, and that's it brings back to the topic, like what the Brazilian media, soccer media, would do if this ownership group have some shady scandals in America. Let's say
Right.
they have some sort of you know corruption, or they are, I don't know, any issues or police involved stuff. What they're gonna do, like, what's it gonna be reaction is, because now Brazil is attracting a lot of foreign investment because of this opening of the soccer market. Like, you see Botafogo have an English owner, Vasco have an American ownership group.
Right. So I was just looking up that 777 group, the partners, and apparently they also own Genoa in
Yeah,
Italy.
Italy, yeah.
So yeah, they own a lot of stuff actually. Just kind of browsing here for their portfolio, they own Sevilla, Spain.
Yeah,
Wow.
so again, yeah, but because they know Vasco is still a viable team. They were still one of the most popular teams in Brazil, and if and they still have a good academy that still produce a lot of good players. So they want to have that opportunity. And Vasco, of course, I think is going to be the hardest team to be sold because of all their issues with their council group and all their political craziness that has been since Eurico Miranda took over in the early 2000s. He was the former Vasco president who now is dead, but when he was president, he literally acted as a dictator of the club. He dominated, he bribed, and there's still a lot of that feeling, that old mentality when he was president. So, but just finishing up the topic of when your sport becomes international and you have to deal with off the field issues. I think Nicholson have the right to have his opinion, and I feel like, you know you have to choose between market opportunity and keep your league, let's say, not dealt with, any controversy, or you just say, hey, we're here for the sport, we don't care about the environment around it, we just care about what happens in the golf course, not in the country.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see how he moves forward if he just returns back to PGA. Um, I think that's probably the most likely because I don't think this league would get that well of ratings, to be honest with you. But
But
let's kind of move over to. Oh, go ahead,
just
finish.
to point out, so I don't understand why American sports league just come play in Brazil, because Brazil will have no human right issues, no
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, the NFL should really do a game in Brazil. I don't understand why it's taking them so long to do a preseason game in Brazil. NBA has
Right.
done it. It was very popular when they brought a preseason game between the Cavs and the Heat here, it was a massive success. So I believe the NFL could do the same. I think, of course, I don't think it's
They
going to
should do it
be.
in Rio at the Olympic Stadium.
Yeah,
The
yeah, or Maracanã. Definitely should be Maracanã.
America.
Maracanã.
Yeah.
I mean, the Olympic Stadium is beautiful and all. I've been there because there's two different stadiums. Olympic Stadium is one, and Maracanã is the most symbolic
Yeah,
one.
America. That's what I couldn't think of the name, but that's the one. The one where the World Cup final was held and everything
Yeah,
with
yeah. I just have
Christ
to
the
make.
Redeemer over it. That would
I have
be
to
ideal.
differential because there's the Olympic Stadium, but that's the in the far behind. That was the one that I went in December to broadcast the game. But
So,
yeah, I think
what's
definitely.
interesting is, in the future too, apparently they're going to start hosting some games in Germany, which
Yeah,
is
Munich.
interesting.
Yeah,
But
I
I'm
think.
just like, you're already in England, so I don't feel like you're expanding that reach that much by going to Germany. I'm surprised they haven't tried Asia. Like, why not Tokyo?
Well,
Or
again, why not Brazil? I think
yeah, why
Brazil is
not Brazil?
a market in terms of ratings for the NFL. Brazilians have, of course, it's not a popular sport. I mean, when Super Bowl was broadcast in the public television, the ratings were not like really low. But of course, it's because it's a niche here in Brazil. It's a very niche, but I think there'll be 40, 50, or even 60,000 NFL fans that'll fill up Maracanã. I want to say there'll be a million people watching on TV, but it's definitely interest to people watching the stadium. That's for sure. Or even
and people
going.
will just show up just as a novelty because I mean, a lot of them have probably never seen a football game before in person.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Because there's still a lot of skepticism of the NFL. A lot of people a lot of old people in Brazil that like sports when they ask about the NFL. Even my grandma, who went to a Tennessee football game in 2015, she was still at like, oh, football is just violence and piling up players. But I feel like it's not. It's a lot of tactics and but they're just used to like Americans with soccer. There's a lot of old Americans who think soccer is boring, it's for kids, and it just takes time to get used to. But I mean, expanding is all interesting. But let's finish up with
Uh,
Daytona.
right. Well, actually, before that, I do want to bring up a quick question. So there's a rumor flying around this evening while we're still on the idea of NFL. Troy Aikman apparently is on the verge of leaving Fox to join ESPN's Monday Night Football broadcasting booth, which is really interesting because obviously him and Joe Buck have been calling games forever. I don't know how many years it's been, but it's been a long time that those two have been together in Fox since 2002. I mean, as long as I can remember. But ESPN, they finally have gotten some Super Bowl games for the next decade, I believe 2026 and 2030. So obviously they got to find a way to improve their booth. Their booth has been subpar for many years, in my opinion. But Troy Aikman definitely would be a boost to that group. And it'd be interesting to see who Fox would replace him with because it reminds me a lot of when they replaced Phil Simms with Tony Romo. I would like to see someone like a Charles Davis or a Greg Olson go next to Buck and be the Fox main crew. Just any quick thoughts on that? Because that would be a huge change in the landscape of NFL broadcasting. As there's also been rumors recently that Al Michaels might leave NBC to call Thursday night games for Amazon.
I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of movement in terms of broadcasting pieces throughout the networks. I think I do you remember when Troy Aikman stated that he was disappointed that the game he was broadcasting on the NFL playoff, the wild card weekend, when he will had to broadcast Tampa versus I think
it was the Eagles.
And he really wanted to do Cowboys and the 49ers. I
Right.
think there was a feeling already that he was unhappy to where he was. I think, of course, it will. I think the game mattered. He wanted to do the Cowboys because he was so much connected to it. It was a big home game in AT&T Stadium, but also maybe he wants to move on and find new era. I believe there's going to be a lot of changes. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Al Michaels come back to the ESPN and wanted to go back to Monday Night Football.
Right. And think about Fox this year only had one playoff game per weekend. They had the Eagles and the Bucks. They had God, what game was it on division round weekend? It was the Niners Packers.
Yeah.
And then they had Niners Rams. So it's the only 3 games they had. Like CBS paid for way more games, and that's how they determined that CBS got multiple games. Of course, CBS got the Nickelodeon game and everything else. I feel like Fox is kind of downgrading their coverage a little bit to save cost. I just don't feel like their coverage has been the same recently, and all sports, honestly. Like I feel like the MLB coverage hasn't been as great. I feel like their NASCAR coverage hasn't been as great. So
I mean,
I don't know what's going on.
Fox was primarily the home of soccer in America, but now they literally don't care about the sport. I remember in like 6, 7 years ago, they owned the World Cup, Champions League, but now they don't care about soccer anymore.
Yeah, except for World Cup, and they're going to try to balance that with football, and I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah, because in Brazil, the World Cup is going to be the only thing that will be happening because Brazil, when the World Cup happening, they move all their sports to end before the World Cup, or stop their season. But this year, since it's going to be the end of the year, they're going to even the fourth division of the state of São Paulo is going to end late October. So no sport will be happening in November, December, or at least no soccer happening November, December because of the World Cup. So, but in America, NFL does not care about the FIFA World Cup. They're going to care business as usual. So Fox is going to have to scramble with, games, and I believe the games, the time zone, I think, is probably in the afternoon games a lot.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. So I don't know how in the world they'll be able to. What the interesting is, I know there's talking about they might try to put the USMT on Thanksgiving Day, maybe, to put them after like the Lions game. That's always on Thanksgiving, so that's always a possibility. But are people really gonna not watch like the Cowboys over soccer? I'm sorry, like that's an American tradition. You can't mess with tradition, and that's why this whole World Cup of Guitar thing is a bad idea to begin with, anyway. But that's a whole other episode of FIFA making horrible decisions.
No, yeah, people making horrible decisions. So, not surprised at all.
Right. Yeah, but let's finish up with that Daytona 500 because it was an exciting race. I enjoyed it. A rookie, Austin Cindric, won only in his 8th ever start. He edged out Bubba Wallace at the line, who was going for his second win ever in his first Daytona 500. I really enjoyed the new car. I thought the new draft package was really entertaining. I felt like the drivers really had a lot of control, which I feel like with previous draft packages wasn't the deal. I felt like the previous draft package, drivers were at the mercy of what the run was behind them. But here they actually had to plan. They actually had to make moves. And it was a good race. It was a good, solid start to this new era. And now we're going to find out truly what this car is made of because this car was made to improve the mile and a halves and to really excel at road courses and short tracks. This week they go to Fontana, which is a 2-mile racetrack. So we're going to really find out what this car is like. And I'm excited to see the rest of the season. And I'm just excited that, no one got hurt. Because there were some gnarly crashes. Harrison Burton went upside down early on in this race. On Saturday in the Xfinity race, there was a horrible crash in the last lap where Myatt Snyder, a younger driver, got turned and literally flipped into the catch fence. His whole car got ripped apart, but he walked out just fine. Probably the worst crash I've seen since Ryan Newman. Yeah. So I was scared he was hurt for a second there. But overall, a really solid weekend. Always exciting, as always, to get started the season at Daytona.
To be honest, I did not watch the race that was broadcast. I think you even saw that I was otherwise busy.
Right.
But, I mean, Daytona is a landmark in NASCAR. I wish Brazil could make stock car as big as NASCAR is.
Right.
Unfortunately, it still doesn't catch on the Brazilian NASCAR, which is called stock car. But Daytona is even Fox News were there. Just show how big still the event is.
Absolutely, and the ratings are back up. It's the highest rated sport event in the weekend. So, and I know IndyCar starts back this week. I know F1's testing right now, so they'll be back, I believe, March 20th. is their first race in Bahrain. I think is their first Grand Prix. So definitely motorsports fans have a lot to look forward to over the next couple of months.
Oh yeah, yeah. So let's go Brazilian topics.
Let's do this. All right. So I know your team Corinthians. They have found their coach.
Finally, finally.
Who'd you get?
Oh my God, Jesus Christ! Let's see. I want to confirm how long Corinthians took to find their head coach. Just to confirm how many days. So it took 21 days, 3 weeks for their new head coach to be hired. His name is Vitor Pereira. He's a former Porto, Olympiacos, and Fenerbahce head coach. He won the Portuguese league twice. He also was very successful in Turkey, and he's a Portuguese coach. As I discussed, I believe, with you before in this podcast, the new trend in Brazilian soccer is get Portuguese coaches because it's been working with Flamengo worked in 2019 and Palmeiras 2020 and 2021. They were the successful head coaches. So you want to try to duplicate that. So Corinthians found their new head coach in Portugal. I'm not surprised with that, but I mean it's going to be just a big question mark. He can be the next Abel Ferreira, which no Palmeiras fan knew before, but now he's won two big titles. Or he can be like Ricardo Sapinto, who went to Vasco and the team couldn't play and they were relegated then. But I believe I think it has a big chance of working. There's a lot of experienced players who even played for Vitor Pereira or even played against him and have a big respect. There's a lot of players in Corinthians who have European experience. So Vitor Pereira will be ready to implement some European style of coaching because like William, Renato Augusto, Juliano, Roger Guedes, Paulinho, they played in Europe. So they are ready to have a European coach. The core of Corinthians roster is experienced veteran players who played in Europe before. So I think it can work. I think Corinthians did the move everybody expecting. Of course, it makes Brazilian coaches anger even grew with the teams because as I was listening to one commentator in another American radio station today, if a Brazilian team hires a foreigner head coach, is a one less team that hires a Brazilian coach. So currently in Brazil, you have Corinthians, Palmeiras, Flamengo, Atlético Mineiro, all have foreigner head coaches. Santos as well. Santos also just hired their new head coach. Guess what? He's an Argentinian, Fabian Bustos. So 5 of the top 12 teams in Brazil have a foreigner head coach. So it just creates a lot of anger towards the Brazilian coaches, feel so downgraded and so depreciated and so devalued. It's just like, oh, only the coaches from any other country is good, but our own country coaches are not good anymore. That's the question that keeps going up. Like you just saw Corinthians and Santos, two big teams in Sao Paulo, hiring one Portuguese and one Argentinian coach, and not even considering a Brazilian head coach. Corinthians did not even consider a Brazilian head coach.
Yeah, so I guess this goes back to what we were discussing earlier about how European football has been considered the gold standard for a long time, and you know how do how does the soccer culture change to where you're not just automatically giving the jobs to the Europeans over the Brazilians who, because obviously I can imagine there's a lot of great Brazilian soccer minds who would be fantastic in that position, and they're not getting the position because they're not from Portugal. I feel like that's a really unfortunate side effect of the desire to be like Europe. You only want European coaches, and I feel like I see this a lot on the international stage, where you'll have all these different teams, they'll have European coaches, even though they're like Cameroon or someone like that. I'm like, could you not found an amazing Cameroonian coach to be the coach of that team? Or like even the U.S. team, half the time we don't have an American coach, but
Yeah,
like I know there's American soccer minds who
look
would be great.
who was the U.S. coach for a long time in the last, uh, for like a lot. I think it was like 5 or 6 years. Jurgen Klinsmann from
Yeah,
Germany.
I'm not saying obviously he wasn't bad. I mean, because he was definitely had a good teams at times. But I know there's great American soccer coaches out there who should have been representing the country. And I think clearly, especially when it comes to Brazil, I mean, my God, I mean, Brazil created their own separate style of soccer. And because Brazil is known for being flashy, for having a flair. And I feel like bringing in European coaches is not being in accordance with that. Because when I watch Brazil, I'm expecting to watch a different type of soccer than when I'm watching Germany. Because in Germany, I'm thinking of a well-oiled machine. Brazil, I'm thinking of like, style.
Yeah, but Brazil, unfortunately, is losing that originality to becoming competitive. And also, I don't think it's more like you want to move towards a European movement. It's just whatever one team does that works, other team want to replicate. Like when Corinthians won the Brazilian championship in 2017 with the coach that was an assistant coach that became a head coach, then everybody was starting to hire brand like very young head coaches because that was what was working. But then Flamengo got Jorge Jesus in 2019, uh, Portuguese coach that nobody knew outside of Benfica fans, and he was highly successful. So what everybody did, just copy Flamengo, try to get the Portuguese coach, and now the Palmeiras Portuguese coach has also been successful. Of course, you want to get a a mildly successful Portuguese coach. If two teams got Portuguese coaches and had a lot of success, you want to
It reminds me of
replicate.
Sean McVay. Because how I remember Sean McVay was had that first great year with the Rams, and then everyone wants, and like if you stood next to Sean McVay for 2 minutes, you're now a desirable head coach.
Yeah, yeah, I think the NFL happens that too. Like, look at this new trend in the NFL. Everybody wants the young, flashy head coach. Not only Sean McVay. You look at Klinsberg, Kingsbury
King
uh,
Kingsbury,
in
Zach
Arizona.
Taylor is young, Matt LaFleur for the Packers, Robert Salah for the Jets. Like
So you see that, even in the NFL happens that when one new trend catches on, like McVay with the Rams, you want to try to duplicate that in your team.
yeah, I mean, it's just I guess it's not a unique phenomenon to just
Like
Brazilian soccer or the NFL.
Nick Saban 3 in college in the
Uh,
SEC.
I mean,
How
Tennessee has fallen victim to that twice.
yeah, yeah. So in Brazil, just and of course, I think this trend will tie it down once probably those foreigners, especially Portuguese head coach, starts to not be as successful. I mean, if Vitor Pereira doesn't work in Corinthians, if Abel Ferreira can't keep Palmeiras competitive, and if Paulo Souza in Flamengo does not have success, then I think the trend will move to, I don't know, maybe go back to experienced head coaches. I don't know, but the trend is that, and Corinthians just got Vitor Pereira, Corinthians fan, Blue Rosonic, watching our show as well. And move on to one of the best soccer games I saw the last few years. Best game of the season by far. The Brazilian Super Cup between Flamengo and Atlético Mineiro in Cuiabá, Mato Grosso. In the 90 minutes was 2-2. In the penalty kicks was 14-13, and Atlético Mineiro in penalty kicks.
14-13. Holy
Oh
cow!
yeah, 14. Let me confirm, but I believe was that 14-13.
So was it like a case where they just neither one could miss?
Yes, yes.
That's insane. I don't think I've ever seen a penalty shootout go that far. I can't even think
No,
of any I've seen that's like gone to like beyond 5.
no, yeah, it was just to be correct, was 8-7, but I believe was some like let me check how many penalties were shot in total. Was one, two, three, four, five, 6, 7. It was like some sort of a, you know, I think it was believed it was like 20 penalties that were shot, and in the end it was 8-7. Atletico Mineiro won, but they deserved to win. I mean, this game only happened because they it had to happen because Atletico Mineiro won the Brazilian Cup and the Brazilian Championship, and the Brazilian Super Cup is between the Brazilian Championship champion and the Brazilian Cup champion. So Atletico Mineiro was already the Brazilian Super Champion, but this game needed to happen because of commercial reasons. So what they did, they got the Brazilian Championship runner-up Flamengo to play against Atletico Mineiro.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm looking up like the stadium right now, so I see it's like in the western part of the country.
Yeah, yeah, it was in the Cuiabá, the Pantanal Arena, where there was a couple of uh, World Cup games there. There's a first division team that plays there. A lot of people were skeptical of this arena becoming irrelevant and not being used, but they're heavily used. But the game only happened there because of all the controversy of where this game originally was going to be in the capital of the country, Brasilia, but the governor there is still limits crowds because of COVID protocols. So what the Brazilian Confederation did, they went to the closest stadium to Brasilia to have fans because they wanted to get revenue of tickets.
Right. So Brasilia isn't allowing fans in, but this area, what town is this? Is it city? Is this
Cuiabá,
is
Cuiabá
Curaba. Um,
is in a
so they
beautiful
are.
area of Brazil. Is in the Pantanal area, beautiful forest. I mean, Pantanal is one of
Yeah.
the like sacred forest lands.
Is it
You
close
know,
to that one city? Because I remember where the U.S. had their first game. It was like in a forest. I forget what the
well,
city's
yeah,
called.
that's the Manaus. That's Manaus. That's
Manaus. Yeah.
where the Amazon is,
Yeah.
which
Because
is
I just remember them talking about. I remember them taking a water break during that game because it
oh
was
yeah,
so humid.
really hot there. Oh my god. Even in July, where it's winter, it's still because it's very humid. Because again, it's in the middle of the Amazon
Hmm.
rainforest, so it's very
Yeah.
humid.
Yeah, that's one thing I
But
love about the show. It's just learning more and more about these random cities, like Paris, or that one team you cover all the time. They have Piracicaba.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, they were playing today, but yeah, I mean that's what this show is. Two countries, two Americas, all sports. I mean,
yeah,
we learn a lot. That's what I love about this show. I can talk about my culture, the things that happen in Brazil, and I love that you and our listeners can learn more and more about Brazilian sports because I know Americans do not care about the world sports stage, and Brazil
hmm
is one of the bottom sport countries that they care about any sports of Brazil. But
right.
happy to talk about things that are happening in my country you know and again, I was so good to see a really interesting game because as much as I love state tournaments right now because you can call me a country boy or a journalist who loves the countryside and how important the state tournament, especially here in Sao Paulo, is for the teams outside of Sao Paulo. I know the games are not appealing. I know the games is not as good. So when you see a game like Atletico Mineiro and Flamengo, the two best teams, the top three teams in Brazil, with Palmeiras, Atletico Mineiro, Flamengo, the top teams in Brazil playing against each other in a one game final. Of course, it's going to be a big game. I mean, look at how the second goal, was beautiful. Was a beautiful game. Was I feel like it revitalized the start of the season. Was really good game. Even this game, I was happy Atletico Mineiro won because it just makes sense when you have when you won the Brazilian Championship and the Brazilian Cup, be the Brazilian Super Champion.
Oh, absolutely. So, um, I mean, it just sounded like an absolutely epic game. And anytime a soccer game's 2-2, I mean, there was a ton of excitement throughout the game.
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and with the crowds there and the fans were like they were nervous, even though it's not a I'll say one of the most desired titles the fans want. It was still important because it was not about the title. It was about beating your rival, your national rival, beating a good team. I feel like all it came down to. And even
Yeah.
when Flamengo was starting to be doubted in a crisis, what did they do? They beat their state rival Botafogo 3-1 today with no mercy. So I guess things are back to kind of a little bit calm in Flamengo, but still though, Flamengo's be questioned a lot recently because even though they still have a called a super team with a lot of talent and a lot of really good players, they can't deliver on a big stage. They are runner-ups in the Brazilian Super Cup, Brazilian Championship, South American Championship. They went to the semifinals of the Brazilian Cup. So in the last few months, they just couldn't win in the big stage. That's the big question the Flamengo fans are asking. Is this team not able to play well in the final game?
Right. And there's so many teams like that where, when they get to the biggest moment, they freeze up. They don't execute the way they're going to, especially in a sport like soccer where every little thing has to be perfect for one or two moments in an entire game. Um, that's that's really hard to accomplish. So yeah, I can understand why certain teams don't. Like it makes me think of like the Netherlands, for example. I feel like they're a team who, when it gets to the big stage, they choke all the time. Or like Belgium, it feels like they choke all the time on the big stage.
No, yeah, the Netherlands is the biggest choker ever in the national team kind of stage, World Cup and Euro Cup. Let's say, like they always have. I mean, how many teams they had with so much talent?
Yeah.
The in 2010 they had Snyder, Robin, Van Persie, Van Nistelrooy, Van Barkhost. A big talent
I mean,
team.
they were loaded. They were so
Loaded.
loaded.
Couldn't win
And
the
like
World
Belgium, the last two, like the last World Cup and the last Euros. I mean, those guys were loaded too, and they couldn't get past Italy. They couldn't get past France.
But I think the Netherlands even more because Belgium is a new generation. Netherlands they had three great generations. Cruyff generations in the 70s. I'll call the Kluivert, Bergkamp, Zenden generation the 90s, and in the 2010s with Van Persie, Van Nistelrooy, Snyder, and Robin. So you had three great soccer generations, and you couldn't win in the biggest stage with those three generations.
Yeah, it's just I can only imagine um, just being a Dutch person and just having to reminisce about how the good times are gone like that. Like you've been to three finals and you've never won a single one, and you gotta wonder how long do you have to wait for the conditions to come right again. Like I'm thinking from the American perspective of 2026 when we're hosting, I think we're gonna have a pretty good squad that year, and that might be our best shot at doing something. So the pressure is gonna be immense.
I think it's going to be more on Mexico because Mexico, they as their league is getting richer and attracting more players, there is a pressure for the national team to be good as well, to finally pass the round of 32. Because Mexico has been eliminated, I believe, in this last 6 or 7 World Cups in the round of 32.
Yeah,
I mean, look at
and they're gonna have a ton of pressure for sure.
look at. I really hope there's another round of 32 game between the U.S. and Mexico in the 2026
That
World.
would be incredible. I would love that. Also, I'm very curious to see what Canada's going to be able to do because they haven't made a World Cup since 1986.
They're going to qualify for the 2022 World Cup. It looks like.
Yeah, I know they're doing way better now. So, and I gotta wonder if MLS is helping with that, just because they have
I
Toronto and Vancouver.
I truly believe so. I truly MLS is improving more the Canadian soccer than the American soccer.
Yeah, so And it's good for them, right? Because I feel like it's good to have both Canada and Mexico with the U.S. and really bring up this continent because we need the North American continent to get better. We need Mexico to get past the round of 16 at some point.
Oh,
Which,
and
yeah,
speaking of which, to close up soccer, and there was the CONCACAF Champions League week, and so New England Revolution advanced versus Cavalry of Haiti because Haiti, though many of those Haiti Cavalry team could not get visas to play in the United States. Did you knew that?
yeah, yeah. I'd heard that in the headlines.
So that was a
So
sad situation. Definitely sad
yeah,
situation. You know that a team was eliminated because of bureaucracy. Literally bureaucracy.
and you never like bureaucracy. Also for the USMT as well, Weston McKinney, a key player for the USMT, is going to be out for the next 3 qualifier games. So that's gonna potentially hurt, uh, especially if the U.S. really falls apart.
So just to wrap up CONCACAF Champions League. So New York City defeats Santos de Gualapias for nothing, advancing to the quarterfinals. Montreal defeated Santos Laguna 3-0, advancing to also the quarterfinals. Today, I think in around 2 minutes, Pumas from Mexico and Deportivo Saprissa from Costa Rica also are playing. The first leg was 2-2. Cruz Azul from Mexico playing Forge. I don't know where they're from, but I think it is Central America. And Seattle Sounders facing Motagua tomorrow as well. And Colorado Rapids are in penalty kicks versus Comunicaciones FC of Guatemala. The first leg was 1-1, second leg 1-1 as well. So they're going to penalties. No, the first leg was 1-0 Comunicaciones, and second leg Colorado won. And there are penalties right now 3-3. So let's see if another American team can make it to the quarter. I really want some American team finally winning the CONCACAF Champions League and making to the FIFA Club World Cup. I really
Yeah,
hope one day that happens. I think it will be big.
it would be. It would be a validation for the MLS, and I really want to see, like New York FC versus Liverpool. Like I want to see what happens.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
imagine if New York City FC wins the CONCACAF Champions League. We can say they're the most successful team in New York, let's say in like what, a decade?
Easily, and I'm not sure who the favorite is for Champions League over because I know they've been playing some of those matches, but I
Yeah,
haven't
they're.
really had a chance to.
I mean, they're already in the quarterfinals, which is big. I want to try to see the brackets, but I think they have a big shot of at least getting to the final. I really think so.
Yeah, it's gonna be. It would be a great thing for the American soccer if they were able to do so.
Yeah, I truly believe that. I really cheering. I mean, I'm already a fan of New York City FC, but like, oh my god, if they can make it to the if they can make it to the at least the final or even win the CONCACAF Champions League, it would be big. But I mean, and I mean, soccer. I always want an American team there because I think imagine like a New York team playing in a FIFA Club World Cup. They can say they're fighting to be the best team in the world. It's not, and again, an American team. Imagine if New York City FC somehow wins the FIFA Club World Cup. They can be the first team ever in the US that can say we won a world title that is literally called a world title, not World Series where only American and Canadian teams play. I think you're muted.
Yeah, here I'm quickly sharing the bracket here that I just found of the Champions League. Hold on, wait, I don't think that. Let's see. Hold on. Actually, yeah. Hold on. We're not gonna do that, but it's gonna be interesting to see who. I mean, they're currently in the round of 16, so a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean the final is gonna be on May 3rd and May 5th. I think let me see. I think I found the so they're gonna play either Comunicaciones or Colorado Rapids, which are on penalty kicks right at this moment. Let's see. Just before we went the show, I want to see how the game is actually. Oh, Comunicaciones is in front, 4-3. Ooh.
Yeah, imagine if we had an All-American final for the
Let's see.
CONCACAF Champions League.
It's possible. It's possible. If I mean if New England Revolution advances at least to the final, and then New York City and Seattle Sounders, I think there's a big chance for finally an American team can be back in the final, because if Seattle Sounders will go ahead and eliminate Motagua and Leon, and Colorado Rapids advance, then there's a solid chance for an American team. But I think it's over. Comunicaciones from Guatemala advanced, so
Hmm.
the first American team eliminated in the CONCACAF Champions League were the Colorado Rapids. So now it's going to be New York City FC versus Comunicaciones of Guatemala.
Yeah, and imagine for some of the other like Guatemala, like Honduras, places like that. Imagine this competition for those clubs is like the Holy Grail.
Or, I mean, for Mexican teams, it is a matter of pride to win that, because you want to show dominance on the CONCACAF. Because, I mean, Mexican fans, majority of them care more about their teams to the national team, Mexico. So they winning the CONCACAF Champions League is already enough pride to show strength in the region, compared to, let's see, win the Gold Cup or the qualifying. But
Right.
if the American team finally wins the CONCACAF Champions League, or even the Canadian team, let's say the MLS versus the Mexican League, then it already hurt the pride of the Mexican dominance in North America.
But if the Mexican national team made a run in the World Cup, I'm sure they would care more about that, right? If they made like the final,
Oh yeah, of
the
course.
semis or something. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Of course, they'll go oversee that over, be beyond that. But I mean, but they know the Mexican team, national team, is limited compared to European powerhouses. So their team dominating or their team dominating in their own league, or even in the CONCACAF Champions League, is already enough pride for them.
Yeah, it's really interesting just to think about the culture down there, because obviously it's compared to Brazil, where like it's soccer, but like in how differently organized is. Because I feel like if I'm wrong, from Brazil, it's like the national football team is first versus individual clubs.
No, in Brazil, definitely individual clubs, especially since the Brazil national team have not won the World Cup in 2 decades. The national teams are definitely more popular than the Brazil national team right now. Definitely, definitely,
Interesting.
definitely. Of course, if Brazil won the World Cup this year, then the Brazil national team popularity will grow. But people don't care. I mean, fans get mad when the Brazil national team calls up their main players and they were not able to play in big games for their own club. So they're mad that they feel like the Brazil national team steal the players from their teams, instead of be like, hey,
Interesting. Yeah.
my team is be represented in the national team. No, they feel like, oh my god, why do they have to steal my team player to play for the national team?
Because I saw this in England, where like people were annoyed they were having to root for like opposing teams, like Arsenal fans are like they don't want to really root for Harry Kane in the English football team, you know. So
Oh yeah,
uh, it's definitely that relationship is interesting. I feel like in the U.S., the USMT is more popular than any one MLS team.
but it's because the U.S. men's and women U.S. women national team, they have been around longer. They have got success longer. So of course, it's about the culture or
Yeah,
the amount of time that would take on.
because
But
agriculture is much more niche here than it is in uh, other places.
let's go to some hot takes, and you start, Nick.
All right, so NBA All Star Weekend was this past weekend. I didn't really watch most of it because it's pointless. It is a very pointless event. I saw a statistic for the dunk contest. 7 out of 25 first round dunks actually went down. So 18 out of the 25 dunks did not go down. Like, apparently, it was such a mess that people are now calling for the dunk contest to be canceled forever. Like, I literally saw a poll earlier where over half of the participants said they don't want it anymore. And then I tried watching a little bit of the game, and it's just a pickup game. Like, no one's playing defense. There's no incentive for anyone to do anything, and I don't really see the point of it anymore. I don't. I feel like back in the day, people used to actually take the game seriously, and it's like the Pro Bowl. It just doesn't feel like there's any point to it. I don't blame the players for not playing hard because you want to save your body for the playoffs. But if you're going to do this event, then you got to find a way to make it mean something. That the MLB All Star Game means something. The NHL All Star Game means something. Um, this NBA All Star Weekend doesn't really mean anything anymore. It's. I feel like it used to be a huge event. I remember as a kid, it seemed like it was a huge event. Now, no one talks about it. Like, I saw no buzz for this whatsoever. Outside of people mocking the dunk contest. And that's a terrible sign, I think, for the future of this event because think about when like Vince Carter was ruling the dunk contest with his crazy windmills and just I mean it was magical. The dunk contest was a must see event, and part of it is they can't get the stars. I want to see like Giannis and LeBron duel it out in the dunk contest, not Cole Anthony and Obi Toppin. Like, and I'm not saying those are bad players, but they're not Giannis. They're not LeBron. It isn't Michael Jordan going taking off in the free throw line or Dr. J showing off. It's it's a shame, and they got to find a way if you're going to continue to make this going forward to get the stars invested in it again because it feels like the stars just don't care about it, and the stars don't care about it. Why should I? Because the NBA more than any other league is about the stars, and I watch the NBA solely to watch the stars play.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I feel like this Team LeBron, Team Giannis, kind of, it was the final nail in the coffin because I like when it was the Eastern Conference versus the Western Conference because that's
Yeah,
well,
there's no pride. Because back then there used to be a pride like, oh, it's the East versus the West, and there's this East Coast West Coast deal. Again, expanded to hip hop, and it was in basketball too, like Knicks versus Lakers and Celtics versus Lakers. Doesn't exist anymore.
I mean, just so the NBA cares about individualism than the competitiveness of the teams. That's why the NBA is so stuck in being small market and global because you can be global with individual stars and you can have pride in your market of your team, but you're lost in the middle. And the All
Yeah,
Star game is a representation of that.
yeah. I mean, there's no reason for the average person to care. I mean, the NBA is the only sport where I don't really follow a team closely. And that's why, because I know it's all about the individual. Like, I know if my team doesn't have LeBron, Giannis, Kevin Durant, my team doesn't have a chance at winning a at the NBA Finals. So why should I care? You know,
Yeah, that's the point. I think that's the NBA kind of Achilles heel. It's finding a way to make appealing to the average American sports fan.
right?
Not the because globally they're a success. Globally you made your stars big, and in your market, of course, people from Atlanta, Milwaukee, Phoenix, you're gonna care about your local team. You're gonna want them to win. But in the middle of that, you got lost because you the because the player became so bigger than the club, the team. Then you don't know the rivalry. There's no rivalry anymore.
Yeah, yeah, because because it's all about player versus players, but LeBron versus Curry. It's not about the Cavaliers versus the Warriors or the Lakers versus the Warriors. Like, who cares what team wins? It's all about what player played better, and it takes the edge. And I feel like NBA commentary has a lot to do with it because they assign you praise and blame on one player. Giannis won the finals for the Bucks, or LeBron lost the finals for the Cavaliers back in 2011, or the Heat back in 2011. They put the credit and all the blame on individual players instead of the whole team. But you don't really see it like the college level, and I think that's what makes college basketball more compelling ultimately, just because it feels like you're actually watching a team game versus an individual's game.
Oh yeah, for sure. And my hot take is Brazilian soccer desperately needs a Hall of Fame to recognize their history, well, I mean, you talk about the All Star Game. How beautiful there was an event that recognized all the biggest stars in basketball, in American basketball, that represents
Yeah, one of
something.
the few good parts of the weekend.
And Brazil does not have that. They don't create events to remember the legacy of Pelé, which is the best soccer player in the world. He's not being recognized, but you still have Zico, Pepe, Rivelino, Ademir da Guia, um, Reinaldo, all those really important players that meant something for our generation, but they don't have recognition. They don't have a Hall of Fame. They don't have events that promote that. Brazil really needs to, you know, promote their history, their soccer history, like, kind of do this kind of event to glorify their history that is so beautiful. How much those people meant to Brazilian soccer. That's the only thing I would have still definitely from the All Star game in Brazil. Create an All Star game so we can recognize like the history of Brazilian soccer, especially because Pelé right now is in the hospital. He's having a lot of health issues. And when he dies, then people be like, oh my God, how important he was for Brazilian soccer. And we had a chance to recognize him in person, but we never do it because we always take that for granted.
Do you have like a city in mind? Like, what is the Brazilian Canton?
Rio, 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 home of Maracanã. You know, Maracanã kinda has a Hall of Fame, which is called you know, the Walk of Fame, which players put their feet in their get history. But you know, it should be more. I don't know. Like there is a place for that. I know. I mean, of course, when I visit Maracanã, I love to have those memories. But it's inside of a stadium. I feel like there should be like a canton. You know,
Yeah,
place designated for that.
yeah. Because there's no team anymore in Canton, but that was a birthplace of the NFL. One of the original cities that they played in, and that's what makes that city so special when it comes to NFL. Like, it's like Williamsport for baseball. Like, that was the place where baseball really kind of originated, and you know, it really kind of shocks me that Brazil doesn't have a soccer Hall of Fame for all the great players that have came out of there.
Yeah, and it would be a good discussion between Rio and Sao Paulo because Sao Paulo can be like, we deserve the Hall of Fame because soccer in Brazil started in Sao Paulo with Charles Miller. But Rio be like, we host the first ever World Cup final in Brazil. We are the city that hosts big games and have a lot of history. And also, I would love to have a discussion of, let's say, there's a MLB Hall of Fame vote. Does this player deserve to get in? Does this player does not deserve to get in? I would love to have that discussion.
Yeah, because my curiosity is, all right. So, how do you evaluate? Do you look at just club? If they also play for the national team, how do you evaluate that? If they play for the national team, but they went off to Europe, how do you factor that into that vote? There's so many more, I think, intricate things that go into a vote like that. Because in America, like with the NFL, there's just the NFL. There's no national football team or anything. Um, but in Brazilian soccer, there's so many elements. There's so many different tournaments to win. Um,
Yeah, and
that
like,
it would be fascinating to see how much would a player actually have to accomplish to get to Hall of Fame status.
yeah, yeah, would love to have the discussion. Like, if you play for more time outside of Brazil than in Brazil. Does what is the value on that? I would love to have that discussion. That's I think what Brazil needs to promote. Kind of talk about the, cherish the past and you know, break. Oh, yeah, cherish the past.
Yeah, I bet you saw the same breaking news I did. Yeah, yeah, about what's going on in Ukraine.
Oh, it's talking about the Russian attacks in Ukraine, I believe.
Yeah, apparently Putin has authorized military operations. So
Ooh, that's
just fantastic. I hope I hope if anyone, I doubt anyone's watching us from Ukraine, but if you are from Ukraine, stay safe. Or if you know anyone in Ukraine, hopefully they will stay safe because it's going
I
to
mean
be tense for a
Donetsk.
while.
I mean because Donetsk is another in the news right now, right? Because it's one
Yeah,
of the that was called the Brazilian soccer city in Ukraine. So many Brazilians went there to play. Shakhtar Donetsk was so popular in Brazil. They went to play their preseason games one year in Brazil because of the so many Brazilians that play for Shakhtar Donetsk. But now
yeah.
they're, in this. They don't know if now if they belong to the Ukrainian league.
I know that's insane because I guess they'll be forced to the Russian league if they get annexed into Russia. And then what
Yeah,
happens to all the contracts? Like you're now in a different league, and I mean, are you even able to play if you're in the middle of a war zone? And what does this do for the Euros? And what happens to the Ukraine national team? It's and of course that of course this is way down the list of stuff that actually matters. What actually matters is the safety of the people, and obviously all the geopolitical stuff with Ukraine keeping its sovereignty and Russia and the U.S. and NATO working out their issues. But I don't know. That's just it's sad that we find ourselves again on the eve of war.
yeah. So in that note, let's wrap up episode 17 of Two Countries, Two Americas All Sports. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. Stay safe and bye.
Bye, everyone.